So I did it. I sold my a7 III and bought a Panasonic GH5. I've officially switched to the dark side. Joking aside, today's video is talking about why I sold my Sony a7 III to buy a Panasonic GH5. So let's do this. What's up, YouTube? Today we are getting into why I switched from the Sony a7 III to the Panasonic GH5 as my primary camera. But before we get into that topic, I do want to take care of some housekeeping, just some quick housekeeping. The first piece of housekeeping is the fact that I just posted a video last week about the 7 Artisans 35mm f1.2, and I'm doing a giveaway for that lens. And so if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. See what you need to do to enter to win that contest and win that lens. So check out that video. The other piece of housekeeping is I am going to make an effort to make my videos a little bit more condensed. I realized last week I spent about 15 minutes talking about a lens, and I started to feel like some of these things can be trimmed down a little bit. And I do realize by talking about it, it's kind of like an oxymoron, or it's counterproductive, like I'm actually making this video longer by talking about this. But I do want you to know that I am going to try to make a conscious effort to make these videos a little bit shorter so that you don't see that timestamp on the video and say, that's really long review. I feel like I can probably talk adequately about these products in about 10 minutes or so. So that's one of the focuses for 2020, making more condensed videos that are information rich for you. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's topic, which is why I sold my a7 III to buy the Panasonic GH5. And I'm gonna break this down into 3 sections. 1 is video performance, 2 is ecosystem, and 3 is budget. And before I start talking about video performance, I wanna make something clear. This is not going to be a video to bash Sony or the a7 III. I love Sony cameras. I love the a7 III. I loved working with it. But for the reasons I'm about to mention, it made more sense for me to switch to the Panasonic GH5 just for my needs. And if you're a subscriber that's already saying, oh man, I'm unsubscribing now because I only subscribe to this guy because he's a Sony user, I'm still gonna be posting Sony videos about the a6000. I'm still gonna be reviewing lenses for the a6000 and the E-mount system. I actually have a couple of lenses coming in specifically for E-mount. So don't worry if you're a subscriber that is a Sony user, I'm still gonna be talking about Sony. We're just talking about me switching my primary camera from the a7 III to the GH5. So with that being said, with all those things out of the way, let's get into video performance and start talking about why I made the switch. So talking about video performance, there are a couple of key reasons why I made the switch from the a7 III to the GH5. And the first thing is going to be the record limit. The GH5 does not have a video record limit. There's reasons why cameras that are made for photography have a record limit on video, and it's all about taxation and things like that. But recently that taxation has changed, or I don't know all the full details, but some mirrorless cameras now do not have a record limit. The a6400, I think the a6600 doesn't have a record limit, but the a7 III does. And you could say, well, why didn't you just switch to the a6400? So that's one reason in video performance why I made the switch, but there are definitely others why I made the switch out of the Sony ecosystem entirely. And one of those things is Codec. Now, I'll be the first to say I'm not one to really explain Codec. I know enough about Codec to make it make sense for me, but to be able to turn around and make it make sense for you, I can't really guarantee that. So instead, I'm actually gonna link up to a video that talks about Codec and tries to break it down in a simple manner. But in a nutshell, the GH5's Codec is a little bit more of a robust file, and so I'm able to do a little bit more color grading and work with the colors a little bit more because it just has a little bit more information to actually manipulate and be able to manipulate in post. So that's the oversimplified version of why I would make the switch about the codec. The GH5 does record in a 10-bit 422 internally. And so for me, that was one of the reasons why I made the switch, was because it is a little bit more of a robust codec with the GH5. So beyond no record limit and codec, one of the other reasons was IBIS. If you're not familiar with IBIS, it's basically just internal stabilization that the camera has. Now, the a7 III has IBIS, and I was actually pretty impressed with how the IBIS performed. However, the GH5 is like a class leader in IBIS. When I originally bought my GH5, I thought to myself, well, that's kind of like an added bonus. I'll have some good IBIS. No, 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 no. This is becoming one of the main reasons why I'm keeping this camera. To give you context, I have an 85mm T1.5 from Rokinon. I took a couple clips with the a7 III and you can tell there's some micro jitters. I put that same lens, the 85mm t1.5, on the GH5. And if you're not familiar with the GH5, it is a micro four thirds sensor. It actually has a 2x crop. And what that means is that 85mm lens is the equivalent on a full frame camera to 170mm. And at 170mm, I couldn't see a ton of micro jitter. That's how good this IBIS is on this camera. When I originally bought the camera, it was kind of like that's cool. No, it's one reason why I'm keeping this camera is that IBIS, because I love handheld filmmaking. I love just taking my camera and filming. I am not Steady Hands McGee over here, and so having that IBIS really helps. Then the last reason for me was 4K 60 frames per second. We can get into the whole discussion about 4K is not needed or slow motion is not necessary, but as a product videographer, primarily because of my reviews, having 4K at 60 frames per second, having that detail and that slow motion is just super, super sweet. Now I will say there are some downsides to having the GH5 for video performance. One is autofocus. I'm manually focused right now, and I'm a little bit terrified because I don't have the best eyes in the world. And so I actually have two monitors right now. I have one on the GH5 and one that's practically right at my face so that I can see if the GH5 is in focus, because I got old man eyes. And so that's a little bit of like a downside for me, is the autofocus. The other thing is low light. This is not a low light beast. I will miss the a7 III for low light performance. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but honestly, the trade-off was worth it for me. So that's some of the video performance reasons why I made the switch. The other reason is ecosystem. I will say E-mount is great because you can use it on the crop sensor cameras. You can also use it on their full frame cameras and even some of their cinema cameras. But it's not the ecosystem I want to be in. My goal as a filmmaker videographer is eventually get a cinema camera. I am not interested in Sony's cinema cameras that I can actually afford. My goal for the last year or so has been to look into something like the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. That is a micro four thirds camera. And so I found myself not buying E-mount lenses anymore. I was either buying like a Canon mount lens and sometimes even like a Sony A-mount lens so I can adapt it to micro four thirds. But it just became one of those things where I stopped investing in E-mount lenses because I knew I wanted to have lenses that would eventually fit the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. And micro four thirds lenses can be used on an a6000, but you can't do the opposite. I can't put Sony E-mount lenses on micro four thirds, but I can take micro four thirds lenses and put it on the E-mount with this lovely adapter by PhotoDiox, not sponsored. And so because of that, I've been investing into micro four thirds lenses. And so honestly, it just made sense to be in that ecosystem and go ahead and get in that ecosystem. So the last thing is budget. And there's two parts to that. There's short-term budget and long-term budget. Short-term budget is the fact that I was still paying off my Sony a7 III, and the amount of money I got by selling the a7 III allowed me to pay it off as well as buy the GH5. And so it got me out of camera debt, which I hate being in debt. It's the worst thing in the world. I hate it. And so then there's long-term budget. Micro four thirds and even crop sensor cameras, the lenses for them are gonna be way less expensive. Full frame lenses are really expensive. And I honestly got really stoked about being that person that found good full frame lenses for people that were on a budget. But I'll be honest, it got really hard to find good full frame lenses that are not really expensive. Now you do have some great companies like Rokinon, like Tamron that make some really affordable lenses, and even Sigma makes some really affordable lenses for full frame systems. But to give you some comparison, the Panasonic equivalent to a 24-70 right now, depending on if you buy the old version versus the new version, is somewhere around $400 to $500 or $600 to $800. And that's 24-70 and it's stabilized. If I were to try to do that same thing on full frame, I'm spending over $1,000. And so long term, being able to buy glass, being able to buy lenses for micro four thirds is just way inside my budget. And for the body itself, I spent about $1,200 on new. Whereas if I were to do a new a7 III, I'd be spending almost $2,000. And so when all is said and done, long term financially, something like a micro four thirds camera just makes way more sense for what I'm doing. This was the final straw for me, was just the fact that I could save money. I don't have to be in camera debt anymore, as well as going forward, I can buy lenses that I can actually afford that are really good quality lenses. So those are my reasons with video performance, with the ecosystem, with budget, I mean, honestly, being a budget filmmaker, videographer, this just makes sense. So if you're in the same boat as me and all those reasons make sense for you, I really hope this was helpful. I really hope this helped you kind of process what I had to process. And again, if you are a subscriber and you're like borderline rioting right now because I'm leaving Sony, I haven't fully left Sony. I still own the a6000, still going to do a ton of videos on the a6000. I'm going to look into doing video tutorials around the a6000, as well as lens reviews for the a6000. If anything, I'm just expanding my community to include Panasonic users, Micro Four Thirds users. So welcome. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the community. We are Anson & Co. And if you're a Canon user, I still have the EOS M. I just haven't got any lenses for it. So, sorry. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like. Remember to check out the 7 Artisans 35mm f1.2 video to enter to win that lens if you are an a6000 or a Sony E-mount user. Check it out. If you're digging the overall content from the channel, if you're excited about what's to come with me using a GH5 and a Sony system, consider subscribing. And as always, go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Don't be afraid to try new things, try new adventures. I mean, it's a new camera, but sure, it's an adventure. But don't be afraid. Just take a step of faith and go. I'll see you guys here next time. Peace. I'm really concerned that this is not in focus. Like I wonder if I have a way to show you. You know what? Hang on. Okay, just so you can see that I'm not lying to you, that's the GH5 monitor and monitor down here. This is my old man monitor. It's a thing. It's a thing. 36 years old this year. Might as well be blind.